Today we're going to discuss the foundation of harmony and music theory. It's called diatonic harmony, and it's a family of chords that live within a certain key. This is an essential concept for songwriting and song analysis, and learning this will give you a much deeper understanding of how chord progressions really work. Let's dive in. So we're going to start by breaking this down in the key of C. Now, diatonic harmony all stems from the major scale. And in the key of C, the major scale is really easy. It has no sharps and flats. The notes are C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and back to C. Now, at this point, I like to really key in on the distances between the notes. This will be helpful later on in the lesson. So from C to D, we have a whole step. From D to E, we have another whole step. E to F is a half step. F to G is a whole step. G to A is a whole step. A to B is a whole step. And then B back to C is a half step. So we have whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. Now the next step in this is to assign numbers to these notes, with 1 being C, 2 being D, E is 3, F is 4, G is 5, A is 6, and B is 7. These numbers represent the interval relationships between the notes. So if 1 is C and E is 3, then the distance between those two notes is a third. The distance between C and G is a fifth, right? And these interval names get used all the time in chord names, like a major 7 chord has that 7th interval in it. A sus4 chord, for instance, has the 4th in it. So these are useful things to know, but it's also incredibly valuable when you start transposing things into different keys, because the note names are going to change. Different keys have different sharps and flats, but the interval relationships always stay the same. So the distance between the root and the third or the root and the fifth is always the same in every key. And so if you can start to think in terms of interval numbers, it makes it easy to move things around the fretboard in different keys. All right, so let's look at the family of chords that stem from this scale. To make a chord, all we have to do is play a note, skip a note, play a note, skip a note, and play a note. And if we take the first note of the scale C, we're going to skip the second note D and we're going to play the third note E. We're going to skip the fourth note F and play the fifth note G. That gives us C, E, and G, a C major triad, or the 1, 3, and 5 from the scale, the root, third, and fifth of the chord, right? And we can do this continuing through all the notes of the scale. If we start on D, we would skip E and play F, we would skip G and play A, and then we get a D minor triad. Continuing up the scale, we would get E, G, and B, which makes an E minor triad. We would get F, A, and C, which makes an F major triad. We would get G, B, and D, which makes a G major triad. We would get A, C, and E, which makes an A minor triad. And then finally, we would get B, D, and F, which makes a B diminished triad. Now we can take our interval numbers and assign these to these chords, with C being the 1 chord, D minor is the 2 chord, E minor is the 3 chord, F major is the 4 chord, G major is the 5 chord, A minor is the 6 chord, and B diminished is the 7th chord. And as we change keys, these chord relationships always stay the same. The 2 chord is always minor, no matter what key you're in. The 4 chord is always major, for example, as long as we're staying diatonic to a major key. So all of this makes it really easy to find the chords that fit whatever key you want to play in. So let's move up to the key of E now. And with everything we've learned up to this point, you should be able to find all the chords that are diatonic to the key of E major. But let's walk through it together. So We know that we've got whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. That's the recipe for our major scale. So that gives us E, F sharp, G sharp, A, B, C sharp, D sharp, and E. And we know that the 1 chord is always major, the 2 chord is always minor, the 3 chord is always minor, the 4 chord is always major, the 5 chord is always major, 6 chord is always minor, 7 chord is always diminished, and then we're back to our 1 chord again. So right there we found all the chords that live within the key of E major. Now this is really cool from a songwriting perspective or a chord progression writing perspective, because it gives you a complete picture of everything that lives within the key. And from a song analysis standpoint, it helps you to recognize what chords of a song live within the key center, and if there's any chords that are outside of that, you know that they're borrowed chords that live within a different key. All right, so now let's do some playing with all this. I've written a chord progression that uses all 7 of these chords that are diatonic to the key of E major. This will help give you a little bit of context to how these chords sound when strung together. So it's a 16-bar chord progression. I'm going to play it down along to the backing track. I'll just play basic bar chord shapes and open chord shapes, but I'll put the chord names up on the screen as we go. All right, so let's dive into playing over this chord progression. But real quick, before we do that, I want to mention if you're into this kind of thing and understanding harmony and how chord progressions work, my course, The Player's Perspective, that I did with Brett Papa, dives really deep into a bunch of great topics pertaining to harmony and chord progression. So check that out. The link is down in the description. But let's get into playing over this a little bit. Now, when it comes to rhythm, my go-to thing is to kind of find little 3-string triad groupings, especially on electric guitar when you're playing along to a track or you're playing with other musicians. You can find a lot of really nice guitar parts that fit into the mix with these little triad shapes. So if I just take the first few chords of the progression, E major to B major to C sharp minor to A, I can play all those chords really in one spot, just with these little triad shapes. So right there I'm playing this little triad, which is G sharp on the bottom, then B, and then E. And then all I have to do is lay my finger down and I have a B triad right there. And then there's my C sharp minor triad, and then my A major triad. And there's a lot of great little rhythm parts that live within these triad shapes, little hammer-ons and pull-offs you can do. All kinds of really useful, great little things. So I'm going to play along to the track now, and I'm just going to use some very simple 3-string triad groupings to make all the changes. And you can see how close all these chords are connected to one another. This is also a great guide when we get into playing some single note melody lines. So last but not least, let's play a little solo over this chord progression. Now, everything we've talked about up to this point is diatonic, meaning it all lives within the key of E major. All the chords are literally built out of that scale. So I can play the E major scale and it will all work over all these chords. But one of the hang-ups and drawbacks to thinking that way, oftentimes I hear people, and I hear myself do it too sometimes, is that when you get trapped in a scale pattern, you start to just meander through the notes of the scale without really thinking about each individual chord and trying to connect your notes melodically to the underlying chord. So that's kind of why I always stress triads and kind of start by showing some simple triad shapes, because within those triad shapes, it's all the notes of the E major scale, but you're going to target key chord tones for each chord and make some important adjustments to help connect the melody more with the underlying harmony. So I'm going to play a simple solo now, and I'm going to connect it to those same triads that we played in the rhythm example. Right, all this kind of stuff. You'll see all of these notes that I'm playing are connected to those underlying triads that we played in the last example. So here's a simple solo. Like all my lessons, the tabs and notation for all these examples will be available on my Patreon. Guys, so this is kind of ground zero for a basic understanding of harmony and music theory. When I learned this as a young musician, it was definitely a big light bulb moment for starting to understand how chord progressions work, because this is sort of the foundation, and everything that you add to it, more advanced concepts, build upon this basic framework. And this is really the foundation for things like the number system people talk about. I talk about all the time on my channel, things like 2-5-1s. A 2-5-1 is just the 2 chord, which in the key of C would be a D minor to a G major, the 5 chord to 1, or a 1-4-5 blues, for instance, which would just be, referring to the 1 chord, the 4 chord, and the 5 chord, those interval numbers that we were talking about earlier in the lesson. So a lot of valuable information in here. It might be kind of a basic lesson for some of you that already have a firm grasp on this, but no matter where you are in your playing, this is always a good idea to commit some of this stuff to memory and learn it if you don't know it already. So until next time, happy practicing and take care.